What secrets are still buried in America's Civil War battlefields, beneath the rolling hills, quiet forests, and open fields where armies once clashed? The earth still hides stories that history books never told. More than 160 years later, the Civil War continues to whisper through unearthed bullets, hidden tunnels, and the unmarked graves of soldiers who never returned home. Imagine walking across Gettysburg at dusk. You feel the cool wind, hear only silence, but beneath your feet lies the ground where tens of thousands fell in just 3 days. Not all their bodies were found, not all their weapons were collected, and not all their secrets have been uncovered. Archaeologists today still dig up forgotten artifacts, rusted rifles, blood-stained buttons, even sealed letters never delivered. Some discoveries raise more questions than answers. How many men vanished without a trace? What unknown strategies remain hidden in buried maps and coded messages? Every battlefield is a time capsule, locked in the soil, waiting for someone brave enough to unlock it. And tonight, we're going to explore these mysteries, step by step, secret by secret. Stay with me, because what we uncover will change how you see the Civil War forever. The silence of a battlefield is deceptive. Today, the rolling farmlands of Virginia, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania appear peaceful: cows grazing, children playing, tourists walking trails where signs mark troop movements. But beneath that calm lies a ground still heavy with memory, still scarred by the violence it once absorbed. It begins with something as simple as a farmer's plow striking metal, a dull clang, a sound that doesn't belong to rock or root. When the dirt is brushed away, a mini ball emerges, grey with age but still intact. Then, another, and another. Soon the farmer realizes his land has been hiding fragments of war for over a century. Across the South and North, thousands of ordinary people have stumbled onto relics in this way, sometimes musket balls, sometimes uniform buckles, and sometimes bones. One such discovery shocked the quiet town of Franklin, Tennessee. Decades after the battle there, a construction crew digging foundations unearthed the remains of dozens of soldiers, buried hastily where they fell. Some still wore fragments of cloth, some clutched personal items, but not all of them were identified, and not all of them were even Confederate or Union. It was impossible to tell. These men vanished from the rosters of history, their families never knowing what became of them. That single unearthed grave raised a chilling question. How many thousands of soldiers still lie hidden beneath the fields we walk today? The Civil War left behind over 600,000 dead. In the chaos of battle, recovery was incomplete. Many were buried in shallow pits, others lost in the forests and ravines. Rain, erosion, and time covered their final resting places. And yet, every so often, the ground remembers. A heavy storm exposes a rusted bayonet. A hunter stumbles upon a skull in the underbrush. Forensic archaeologists are called, and suddenly the past erupts into the present. But there are discoveries that go beyond the human tragedy. In 1970, on the outskirts of Petersburg, Virginia, explorers investigating the old Confederate defense lines stumbled upon something astonishing: a sealed tunnel, long thought to have collapsed after the famous Battle of the Crater. This forgotten passage revealed evidence of explosives, abandoned tools, and desperate attempts at survival. The Union's mining operation had been catastrophic, killing hundreds in the explosion and many more in the slaughter that followed. But within the tunnel, researchers found signs that some soldiers may have been trapped underground when it collapsed, men who were never recorded, never rescued, and never found. Until that moment, these revelations changed the way historians see the war. They force us to ask whether official accounts captured the full truth. Were some battles far bloodier than records show? Were tactics far more desperate than commanders admitted? The battlefield itself holds the answers, yet the soil guards them carefully, revealing only fragments. Still, not all discoveries come from chance. In Gettysburg, teams of metal detectorists and licensed archaeologists have mapped fields long thought to be empty. What they uncovered was startling. Entire clusters of dropped cartridges, suggesting moments of panic where men discarded ammunition and fled. This wasn't the image of soldiers holding firm lines, as statues and paintings would later depict. This was chaos, terror, men breaking and running when the line collapsed. The relics tell a story that official reports often smoothed over, a reminder that history is written by survivors, not always by truth, and sometimes the artifacts themselves raise more questions than they answer. At Antietam, one of the war's bloodiest single days, a relic hunter unearthed an unusual brass plate with strange etchings, At first assumed to be decorative, closer inspection revealed it was a cipher disk, used for encoding messages. The presence of such an item suggests there were layers of communication and espionage still not fully understood. Who carried it? Was it Confederate? Union? Did a secret courier fall in battle before delivering an urgent message? That single object opens an entire corridor of speculation, hinting that beneath the gunfire and cannons, another war of shadows was being fought. But the battlefield doesn't only hold weapons and relics of war, it holds the stories of those who tried to live through it. Near Spotsylvania, excavations revealed the charred remains of cooking pots, broken bottles, and a child's shoe. What was a child's shoe doing on the battlefield? Some historians suggest families fleeing the fighting passed through, caught in the whirlwind of war. Others argue it may have belonged to a drummer boy, some no older than 12, who marched alongside hardened soldiers. The artifact itself doesn't answer. It only deepens the ache of mystery. And then there are the ghost stories, whispers that persist among locals and visitors. Guides at Chickamauga tell of tourists who suddenly smell gunpowder on the breeze when no reenactments are taking place. At Shiloh, some claim to hear faint cries at night near the sunken road where men were cut down in waves. Skeptics dismiss these as imagination, yet they echo a deeper truth. Battlefields are haunted, not only by folklore but by unfinished history. They hold secrets that refuse to rest. There was one discovery, however, that shook researchers to their core. In the mid-1990s, an excavation team at Cold Harbor uncovered a cache buried deep in the soil. Dozens of letters sealed in waxed paper. They had been hidden by a Union soldier during the brutal days of the battle, perhaps to lighten his pack or protect them from rain. Many were unreadable, the ink blurred by time, but a few remained intact. One reads simply, "If I do not return, tell Sarah I thought of her until the end." That letter was never delivered. That soldier never returned. The battlefield became his grave, and his words remained buried with him for over a century. This discovery forces us to confront the most human mystery of all, not weapons, not strategies, but the voices of individuals lost to time. Every bullet and bayonet speaks of war, but every letter and button whispers of life interrupted. For every soldier recorded in history, countless others remain silent, waiting in the soil for someone to hear them again. Yet with every revelation comes a deeper unease. What if the ground is still hiding stories that could rewrite what we think we know? What if certain battles were misreported? What if atrocities were buried along with the bodies? There are accounts of lost regiments, units that vanished during the chaos of retreat. Were they truly annihilated? Or do their remains lie scattered in forgotten woods, unmarked and unmourned? And here lies the tension. Archaeologists and historians are racing against time. Modern development threatens to pave over sacred ground. Shopping malls rise where cannons once roared. Highways cut through lines of advance. Every year, pieces of history are destroyed before they are discovered. Yet the earth still guards its secrets fiercely, giving them up only in fragments. As the sun sets over Gettysburg and shadows stretch across the fields, it is easy to forget the silence here is not natural. It is imposed. Beneath that silence lies an unfinished story, waiting for the living to listen. But to listen, one must dig in. Sometimes what is uncovered is not just relics but revelations that challenge everything we thought we knew. And just when we think the soil has told us all it can, something else emerges. In 2019, a group of researchers scanning a Virginia South field with ground-penetrating radar discovered anomalies that suggested vast underground chambers. Were they collapsed bunkers, mass graves, or something else entirely? The scans showed outlines but gave no details. Excavations have been slow, permissions tangled in bureaucracy, and so the mystery remains. Whatever lies beneath has yet to be revealed. It is here at the edge of discovery, where history and suspense collide. The battlefield is not finished speaking, and as long as secrets remain buried, we are compelled to keep asking, what else lies beneath our feet, waiting for the day it finally returns to light? The story of America's Civil War battlefields is not only written in bullets and bones. Sometimes, the earth gives up something far more intimate, far more haunting, words scratched onto paper, carved into wood, or etched into stone. And when those voices return to us after more than a century of silence, they often reveal truths no official history dared to record. It began with letters. Some were preserved by luck alone, hidden from rain in tin boxes, sealed in wax, or buried deep enough that time could not devour them completely. Each one is a window into the mind of a soldier standing at the edge of eternity. In one, a Confederate private wrote, "We march tomorrow, and I cannot say if I shall see another dawn." In another, a Union soldier confessed he feared not death, but dying nameless, with no one to mark the ground. These voices are not grand speeches, not political proclamations. They are the rawest of confessions, the kind men only wrote when they thought no one would ever read them. But every recovered message also deepens the mystery of what else still lies hidden. One discovery at Manassas in the early 2000s stunned archaeologists. Buried inside a rusted ammunition box were scraps of paper filled with numbers and symbols. At first, they were dismissed as supply notes. Later, codebreakers realized they matched the structure of a cipher, a hidden language of war. If true, it could mean the battlefield itself still conceals fragments of a secret intelligence network. Were couriers killed before delivering their encrypted messages? Were vital orders buried in the chaos, never to reach their commanders? The coded scraps leave us with a chilling possibility. Battles may have turned not only on bullets and bayonets, but on messages that never arrived. These mysteries are magnified when we remember how chaotic the Civil War truly was. Communication lines were fragile. Runners carried messages through gunfire. Telegraph wires were cut by raiding parties, and scouts were hunted like prey. A single letter lost in the mud could mean hundreds of men walking into an ambush. And if a battlefield still hides those missing messages, then every artifact unearthed might rewrite the story of victory and defeat. One such rewriting nearly happened at Fredericksburg. While restoring an old trench line, researchers found carved initials on a wooden beam, JWC, 14th. After weeks of digging through rosters, they discovered the soldier's full name, James W. Carter, a man listed as missing, presumed dead. His initials proved he had survived longer than believed, trapped in the trenches, perhaps still fighting long after the official reports claimed the line had broken. The beam was a message to history itself, a silent protest against being forgotten. But sometimes what emerges from the ground is darker still. In 1985, near the fields of Shiloh, a local historian unearthed a diary sealed in a tin coffee can. The pages were waterlogged, most words impossible to read, yet enough remained to tell a disturbing story. The soldier who wrote it described not the battle, but what happened after. Abandoned, wounded, crying out, scavengers stripping bodies, men digging shallow graves under the moonlight. His final entry read, "The earth is heavy with their voices. I cannot sleep." That diary was buried not to preserve it but perhaps to silence it. This is where the emotional weight of battlefield discoveries presses hardest. These are not just curiosities or collector's treasures. They are the last breath of men who wanted anyone to know they were there. When we hold their letters, their carvings, their diaries, we are holding their hands across time. And yet, we are also intruders, forced to decide how much of their pain should be unearthed. What makes it even more unsettling is how often these discoveries contradict the heroic imagery of war. History books speak of gallantry, of noble sacrifice. The artifacts whisper of terror, loneliness, and sometimes despair. At Cold Harbor, a famous battlefield where thousands were cut down in a matter of minutes, archaeologists uncovered not just weapons, but crude playing cards scratched with charcoal. Soldiers waiting for death passed the time gambling, desperate to forget the inevitable. These objects tell us that behind the glory painted in murals, war was filled with human attempts to escape the unbearable weight of fear. And yet, not all discoveries speak of fear. Some pulse with resilience. In a small excavation at Vicksburg, archaeologists found a harmonica buried in the dirt near an old rifle pit. Its reeds were rusted, but tests confirmed it still could produce faint notes. To imagine a soldier playing music in the middle of a siege surrounded by hunger, cannon fire, and death reminds us that the human spirit finds ways to survive even in the darkest hours. That harmonica, forgotten for 150 years, still sings if you dare to lift it to your lips. But here is where the story takes a darker, more unsettling turn. For every harmonica, for every love letter, there are discoveries that hint at truths long suppressed. Rumors have circulated for decades about mass graves, not of soldiers, but of civilians caught in the crossfire, entire families wiped out, their stories erased from the official record. Near Atlanta, construction crews uncovered human remains that appeared to belong not to soldiers but to women and children. The site was quickly sealed, the remains quietly reburied, and little more was said. Was it an accident of war, or a massacre hidden beneath the weight of history? Without full excavation, the answers remain locked in silence. And then came an even stranger revelation: objects that did not seem to belong to the Civil War at all. In Gettysburg, during a sanctioned dig in the late 1990s, a small pendant was discovered bearing an inscription in French. It was traced to a 19th century Parisian jeweler, far beyond the reach of an average soldier's means. How did it end up on that field? Was it a gift, a family heirloom, a token carried by a foreign observer? Or did it belong to someone who should not have been there at all? The mystery of the pendant suggests the war's battlefields may also hold traces of unknown participants, outsiders whose presence was erased from memory. What ties all of these discoveries together is a single unsettling thought: the ground does not lie. Letters, diaries, relics, they are not polished accounts shaped by politics or pride. They are the raw truth, the evidence left behind by those who never had a chance to explain themselves. And as more secrets emerge, they challenge us to reconsider how much of our understanding of the Civil War rests on incomplete or manipulated records. This brings us back to the coded messages found at Manhattan. For decades they remained an unsolved puzzle, lines of numbers and marks no one could decipher. But in 2015, a graduate student at the University of Virginia claimed to match them to an obscure Confederate cipher system. If his interpretation is correct, the papers were instructions for a hidden supply, cache, possibly weapons or ammunition buried somewhere near the battlefield. The cache itself has never been found. If it still exists, it could be the most significant untouched treasure of the war, or it could already be gone, destroyed by time. The possibility hangs in the air like a riddle unsolved, and so we circle back to the same haunting question: what else lies beneath our feet, waiting for the shovel, the storm, or the chance accident to bring it into the light? Every battlefield, every inch of soil, is a library whose books remain unopened. We are left with fragments, whispers, and half-told stories. Each discovery closes one mystery only to open another, pulling us deeper into the labyrinth of the past. Tonight, we have heard voices, the letters, the ciphers, the diaries buried in tin cans. But the voices are not finished speaking, because even more than messages on paper, the earth itself holds evidence of strategies, structures, and secrets that were never meant to be discovered. And it is in those hidden places beneath collapsed forts, under scorched houses, inside forgotten tunnels, that the most unsettling mysteries of the Civil War may still be waiting. Night fell like a curtain, and with it came the kind of hush that makes you hear your own breath. We were back at the Virginia site, where ground-penetrating radar had once drawn ghostly rectangles under the soil. For months the shapes lingered as rumor chambers, trenches, or the darker possibility no one wanted to say out loud. Now the permits were in hand. The landowner stood by the fence, arms folded, as headlights swept across the field, and the crew unloaded shovels, lights, cord reels, and a compact auger. It felt less like archaeology and more like opening a locked room that had been sealed since the dead still had names. Soil gave way in layers, each color a sentence in a buried book. Sand mottled with charcoal, clay streaked like smoke. Then the sound changed. The shovel's bite dulled, metal kissing wood. We brushed the area clean and stared at an edge straight, as a rule, smeared with tar. Not a grave, a wall. The air cooled, as if the earth exhaled. We widened the cut until the outline appeared. A box built of timbers, packed with soil, tight as a ship's hull. We pried at a seam, and felt it give. Behind the plank blew a draught of stale, cold air. The first look into that darkness made the heart stutter. A narrow shaft dropped at a slight angle, hand-hewn, ribbed with supports. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. This was military carpentry, the kind born of urgency and fear. A mine, not a modern one. A Civil War tunnel, sealed and forgotten. The same kind of work that had turned Petersburg into a crater. The same grim math of men with picks, racing time and breath. We rigged a camera on a line and sent it down. The feed flickered. The beam cut a white thread through the gloom and painted the walls with long shadows. At 6 feet, sharp. At 10, a broken shovel blade. At 12, a set of notches cut into a post. 5 marks. Then 4. Then another 5. Tally marks. Someone counting. Days, feet, men. It's impossible to say. The camera bumped a corner, and its light fell across something that didn't belong underground at all. A small oval gleamed dully from the silt. Stuck between 2 ribs of wood, we made the call to widen the mouth, and shuffle down, slow and careful. The first touch of the tunnel air felt like stepping into a cellar, moist, metallic, the taste of old iron and lost smoke. Knees and elbows, a careful slide, a whisper of dirt raining from overhead, and then the space opened enough to crouch. The oval waited where we'd seen it on the screen. It was a locket, the kind you press with the thumb to open. The hinge resisted, then clicked. Inside, a ghost of a face stared up from beneath a film of dirt. The portrait had bled away with time, but you could still make out a soldier's stance. Shoulders squared, one hand on the lapel. On the back of the locket, scratched with a pin, 3 letters whispered their way back to life. JWCTHE, initials from Fredericksburg. The carved letters on a timber that had proved a soldier survived longer than the records said, James W. Carter. We had never known where his story ended. Now the dirt itself had answered, and not where anyone expected. Fredericksburg and this site were miles apart. Different months, different movements, unless he'd been transferred, unless he'd been captured, unless he had run. The landowner took a step closer. What does it mean? He asked. I wanted to say it meant a man's last steps were underground, that he'd crawled where we now crawled, that he'd brought a locket with him like a talisman. But the truth is, the earth never gives you the full sentence. It gives you fragments, and the human heart stitches them into stories. We pressed on, the tunnel running like a vein toward a line of woods that marked the olden. The roof sagged in places, in others it held firm as if the carpenters had worked with the stubborn pride of a barn raising. I brushed my hand across a beam and felt letters beneath my glove. Someone had gouged a word with a nail, not a name, a plea. Water. That single word shrank the century between then and now to nothing. It was midnight. It was noon. It was yesterday. Men are always thirsty underground. They're thirsty when the air turns into a clock you can't stop. And you could feel, in that one word, the pounding head, the dry tongue, the echo of voices. It wasn't heroic. It was human. We reached a widening, a small chamber tall enough to kneel without bowing your head. And that was where we found it. The wall was smooth, mud-tamped and glossy, except for a square about a foot across, a patch that looked different, darker, as if someone had added it later with hurry and shaking hands. A plug, the kind you make when you want to hide something from the light. We didn't rush. You never rush. Every movement underground carries a price. We braced the ribs, set wedges, and worked the margin of the plug with a thin chisel. The mud flaked in leaves. The square loosened, then slid out like a drawer. Behind it, the beam from the headlamp reached into a pocket. A satchel waited inside. Leather, slick with age. We coaxed it out, eased it into the world, like lifting a bird with a broken wing. Its straps gave with a sigh. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay paper, several sheets. The top one carried a map hand-drawn in those neat, anxious lines soldiers use when they want the world to make sense. A trench line, a series of dots marked with small numbers. The other sheets were lists, items, rations, tools, and on the last, a column of names. They had been crossed out in 2 inks, some with a single line, others blotted until the paper tore. At the bottom, in the same hand that had drawn the map, one sentence: if found, do not bring this above. Send only the password. The password. The cipher scraps at the rumors of a buried cache that had never been found. Could the dots on the map be coordinates for packages hidden beneath the field? Could those names be the men who placed them? The beauty and cruelty of discovery is that it solves one silence and births another. We had hoped for closure. Instead, we were handed directions. We emerged just before dawn, faces grey with dust, eyes brain bright, too awake to be tired. The landowner made coffee on a camp stove and didn't speak. When someone finally did, it was to ask, what now? The answer came from the simplest place. We would check one of the dots close to the fence line, where the field ran toward a shallow ravine. If the map was real, if the tunnel was what it seemed, that dot would mean another mouth in the earth. By mid-morning we were back at it. The first spade went in like a promise. 10 inches down, clay, 18. At 22 the shovel struck something hollow and sang. We scraped back the soil and uncovered a lid, thin and fragile. Under it, sawdust. Under the sawdust, there it was, the kind of thing soldiers hide when they know patrols will comb the ground at dawn. A tin of percussion caps, a handful of cartridges wrapped in waxed paper, a roll of linen bandage, yellowed but perfect, and beneath that, small bottles, stoppered with cork and sealed with wax. The labels had faded, but the ghost of a word stood out if you tilted it into light. Laudanum. We weren't standing over a weapons depot. We were looking at a lifeline. The dots on the map weren't caches for attack. They were emergency stores for men who knew they might be cut off and bleeding. The cipher might not have been about a hidden arsenal, but a chain of mercy. It didn't make the war kinder, but it made the men who fought it more complicated than the paintings suggest. In that moment, with the bottle in my hand catching the sun, the story shifted. The battlefield wasn't only a place of killing, it was also a place where strangers planned to save each other. Pause, I said. We brought out a portable scanner and walked a slow grid across the nearest 3 dots. The screen answered with 3 distinct anomalies, shallow, small, in exactly the pattern the map promised. Suddenly, the field was a constellation, and we were standing under its sky. If this history is your kind of deep dive, if you live for the moments when a single object flips an old story on its head, this is where you join us for the journey. Follow, subscribe, keep watching, because the map didn't end at the fence. It pushed into the trees. The pace quickened, because the day did. 2 more cash boxes gave up their secrets. More bandage, more cartridges. A folded scrap in one that read, "If we slip the line, head north by the oak with the lightning scar." The oak still stood. The scar ran down its trunk like a silver river. We reached it by noon and felt the ground harden under our boots. The scanner bloomed, but the shape wasn't small. It stretched, it curved, it branched like a hand. Not a cache, a structure. The first trench here had been filled at the end of the war and planted over. We cut an exploratory slice and hit log-heavy, dark water sea. Beneath it, the top of another tunnel, broader than the first, lined with barrel staves, fitted tight to make a doorway. I slid my fingers into the seam and felt something that did not belong to wood or earth. A twist of wire, thin, taut, modern. We froze. It was a hunter's snare, wired across a small opening further down, likely set years ago for raccoon or fox. Not a trap of war, but it reminded us that time doesn't respect neat lines. Every generation leaves its signature. We cut the snare, eased the door, and opened the way into a darkness that felt different from the first. Colder, deader. We stepped inside. The sound here was the sound of your heart beating in your ears. The floor dipped, the ceiling rose, and then the tunnel bent and revealed a kind of room-a-crude cellar with shelves cut into clay walls. The shelves held bottles like the ones we'd found above, except these were empty and broken. Their smell was gone, but the memory of it lingered in your throat. Morning came with the sky the color of tin and the smell of wet hay rising off the field. We stood where the red stake marked the edge of what we could touch, the ravine yawning beyond like a mouth holding its breath. New papers were in hand, signatures stacked and stamped. The landowner watching from the fence line with a thermos clasped to his chest. The line we couldn't cross yesterday had moved by a few feet, just enough to let us reach the circle the scanner had drawn in our minds all night. A well, a cistern, a vault, something older than the war, borrowed by it, and then returned to silence. We cut brush first, the branches whispering and snapping, leaves slick with last night's storm. The soil here was different, pebbled and pale, edged with flint. At 2 feet the spade found stone, not a slab but a ring. The curve was clean. Our fingers traced it like reading braille. A rim of dressed blocks, mortared tight by a hand that knew how to keep water where it belonged. The well's throat had been capped. Someone had taken great care to close it. Unsealing it wasn't a job for bravado. We pried 1 stone at a time, logging the order, mapping the circle. The pattern, a kind of quiet music only the crew could hear. The last block lifted, and the earth exhaled, a chill that rose like a warning. The air from below smelled mineral, old as a cellar, with a thin thread of something else, smoke, or the memory of it. We lowered a lamp and watched the light fall into the dark until the beam hit a floor 10 feet down, packed and flat. No water, a room. We rigged the ladder and dropped into the past with our hands pressed to the cold of the wall. The well had been bricked smooth to the lip and then dressed with wood below. The floor was plank. Shelves had been fitted into niches, the kind that keep jars from rolling. But this wasn't a pantry. Someone had turned a well into a refuge. Stacked against the far wall, wrapped in burlap, lay 3 long bundles. We knew the shape before we cut the cords. They were crates. The boards gave with a dry squeal. Inside the first we found only burlap again, then straw, then glass bottles lined like sentries, empty, rinsed and stoppered, labeled in a hand that tried to be neat and failed in the rush. Tincture of opium, ether, camphor, laudanum again. The second crate held splints cut from barrel staves, linen rolls tied with twine, and a wooden case with brass latches. The hinges creaked and displayed scalpels sitting in velvet like silver fish. The third crate was heavier, and when the lid lifted it let out the faintest breath of sour, like old leather left in the sun too long. Inside lay boots, a dozen pairs, all left feet. None of it made sense until it did. You don't hide medicine in a well unless you're preparing for the night men crawl to your door. You don't stock splints unless you expect bones to break. And you don't keep left boots unless you plan to cut right ones for bandage straps, or you're taking them from men to hurt, to fight, and promising to return what you can't replace. The room took shape around that thought. It wasn't a cache for soldiers hunting advantage. It was a cellar for those fighting to keep breath in broken bodies. A hospital underground. A shelf near the ladder held a ledger bound in board and cloth, its cover furred with mold. We lifted it like a sleeping thing. The first page had a title written in a careful hand. Visitors, not patients, not casualties, visitors. The tone rearranged the room all over again. Below, in columns, were names, or pieces of names. Some were whole, some were initials, some were words that were not names at all. Mother, boy, left at dawn. The date stopped and started. The writing changed hands midline more than once. A red thread bound around the book's spine carried a small card, like a tag you tie to a package. Password, ask for river. The card trembled in my grip. Not ask at the river, ask for river. The phrase wasn't a place. It was a word you said to be recognized. The cipher scraps at Manassas, the map in the tunnel, the caches of medicine strung like beads in the grass. The pieces pulled toward one center, and the center wasn't a general. It wasn't even a regiment. It felt domestic. It felt local. It felt like a house with a door you knock on only when you have no choice left. We read a page at random. JWC, arm laid open, fever by evening, breathing shallow, asks for Sarah. The sentence dried my mouth. It could be coincidence. There are 1,000 names that match 1,000 initials, but the field had been whispering the same 3 letters for days, and here they were in ink. A noise creaked above, the rope against the well's rim. The landowner leaned in and called down softly, as if speaking into a church. You need anything? Time, I said, and he laughed without sound. We pushed deeper. Under the ledger was a tin like the coffee cans we'd seen before, this one with no lid. Inside lay folded cards, edges rounded, their faces blank. In the corner of the well, under a loose plank, we found a long bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The cloth peeled like onion skin. Beneath it, canvas printed with a map of the county so old the road names were wrong. 4 spots marked with small circles. Beside each was a portrait drawn in pencil with a talent that surprised me, faces with character and care. A woman with white set eyes and hair pinned tight. A man with a narrow chin and a scar drawn as a gentle line. A child with a serious mouth. And a second woman, older eyes lifted as if listening. Beside the portraits, not names, but letters, like a score in music. F, then A, then D, then again as someone had written a sound into a map. The harmonica from Vicksburg flashed across my mind like a trick of light, a tune as a signal, a few notes as a password. If you can't trust paper, trust a melody. If a patrol stops you, you're just humming to yourself. If a man you've never met steps out of the trees and draws breath at the same bars, you know you're home. We took careful photographs, sealed the book in a bag, and moved to the back wall. A patch of stone was mortared newer than the rest. In the center, at shoulder height, a small flat piece of slate had been set like a keystone. There was writing on it so faint you had to tilt the lamp until the letters caught like fish scales. S2J. The same phrasing we'd found on the knife-cut marker under the oak. Here it was, written with time and patience, not a hurried blade. It wasn't a grave marker. It was a dedication. From S to J, from Sarah to James. The name curved through the room like a wire pulling us along. The locket in my pocket felt heavier. The playing card in the kit. The hearts. The scroll demanding Sarah be paid. Men don't write a name on a card unless it matters. Women don't carve initials like that unless the risk feels holy. A tremor ran through the wood under my hand. Not much. The sort you feel when a loaded truck passes over a bridge. Everyone glanced up on instinct. Nothing. Silence. The kind that makes you think your heartbeat is too loud. I set my palm to the floor and felt it again. a thrum, far away. Might have been a tractor in a distant field, or the river itself gnawing at its banks after the storm. The thought pried at a memory. Password, ask for river. We lifted the plank that had flexed. Beneath, a space shallow as a shoebox. In it lay a wrapped rectangle the size of a book, sealed with black wax, stamped with 2 letters that were not letters at all, but shapes of tiny jars. When the wax broke, the cloth opened on a wooden frame stretched with parchment. The thing was a mirror, but not glass. A tin plate, polished until it held a face. Our faces, wavering in the lamplight. Along one edge someone had scratched a note, shallow as dust. Show this to the sun for truth. We climbed back to the day like swimmers coming up from deep water. Clouds slid across the light. I tilted the plate under a clean patch of sky, and the sun rode across it in reverse, like a house number seen from inside. A faint line of dark appeared, then letters formed. The way a photo comes up in a bath, if you've ever watched black grow out of blank. Words burned in slow. Go to the river bend where the white stone sits. Knock once and twice. Ask for river. If you are hunted, hum the tune. It was a map in a sentence. Proof where we needed proof. The vault wasn't meant to hoard. It was meant to guide. We should have called it for the day. We should have staged the artifacts and sent the email that begins a dozen slow processes. But the river has its own gravity, and the line of words pulled as if they were rope. The landowner didn't ask what next. He just opened the gate that led down a cattle path flanked by blackberry. His thermos dented and resolute under his arm. The bend was a short walk and a long memory. The white stone was exactly what the tin plate promised, a boulder pocked like old bread, chalky against the red bank. Water whispered against it, where the current caught and slipped. It looked like a place children would sit in summer, or lovers in spring, or refugees in any season, trying to feel invisible. We knocked once, then twice, as if the river had a door. Nothing answered, which was expected, and somehow still disappointing. Then the landowner said he had a thing his grandfather used to whistle. He pursed his mouth and sent a simple melody into the trees. It wasn't a hymn. It wasn't a march. It was only for notes, rising and falling like a question that knows it will be asked again. We came before dawn, when the field was still holding on to night, and the grass bent under its own dew. The oak with the lightning scar stood like a rib of the past, black against the sky, turning the color of chilled ash. The handmade marker waited at its roots. The new line, not a grave. A door, hadn't washed away in the rain. It looked calmer in the half-light, as if it had always been there, and we were the ones who had finally learned how to see it. No speeches, no ceremony, only a shared breath before the work. We brushed the soil in a slow circle around the stone, gloved hands skimming for anything that felt less like earth and more like a promise. At 6 inches the trowel tapped a shape just wider than a palm, smooth as bone, cool in the morning air. It was a wooden plug, fitted tight into a sleeve of clay and ash. Not a lid to lift, a cork to persuade. The landowner knelt with us. He laid 2 fingers on the plug, the way you might steady a child's shoulder, and the simple human weight of it set the piece loose. The plug rocked, rose, and left behind a throat of darkness no wider than a hat brim. Air came up out of it, sharp and root. We set the lamp and let its beam fall in. The light caught on something that flashed back a little too clean. Metal 3 inches down, set in clay as if it had been pressed in with a thumb and told to wait. I thought of hidden locks, of snags meant to trick a soldier's hand in the night. But when my fingers reached in, they found not a trap but a ring. Iron, fixed to a small board. The board slid free with a whisper and brought a length of twine knotted to its underside. The twine vanished into the dark. We held it the way you hold a fuse and said nothing at all. I pulled, gently. The twine tightened, then yielded. Something below gave in stages, as if unhooking itself from the past. A door answered with a soft throat-clearing sound. Dirt fell in a dry little rain, and then the ground beside the oak shifted a fraction, the way the riverbank panel had. A seam appeared where there had been root and loam. The earth had been taught to forget there was a hinge. We brushed until a rectangle took shape, lid-sized, set flush with the forest floor. Someone had camouflaged a room and left it to sleep under a tree that would outlive them. We lifted carefully, every motion slow enough to run time backward. The lid came up into our hands, the smell of old sap, of cool stone, of linen that's been folded for years. Beneath it lay a shallow chamber lined with planks and the bare suggestion of shelves. A candle nub waited by the mouth like a tooth held for a child, and on the nearest shelf, At the edge, where any exhausted hand would reach first, sat a small wooden box with a brass hasp. The hasp wasn't locked. It had never been locked. Trust is its own code. Inside the box were two things: a harmonica with a dent near the middle like a thumbprint, and a folded sheet of heavy paper, sealed with a cross of blue thread. The thread's knot had been tightened by someone who wanted it to hold for more than one lifetime. I worked it loose with the patience that old knots demand, and the paper opened on a map. Not a battlefield map, not a county map, a river map. It ran in lines always slightly wrong, the way the living river refuses to be held to a straight answer. Along its curves, 4 small symbols repeated: a circle, a triangle, a heart, a small square. Beside each, a single letter, written in a familiar hand: S, J, M, R. The harmonica gleamed in the early light, and I could almost hear 4 notes rising out of the metal. The landowner spoke the names like he was tasting them: Sarah, James, maybe Mary, and R. River. River as a name, not only a place, not only a password. If the code asked you to ask for river, maybe you were asking for a person who moved where the river moved, who listened for the tune at night and made a door in the bank swing open only for those who could sing in time. We lowered ourselves into the chamber with our weight spread carefully. It wasn't deep, 3 feet at most. It had never been meant for hiding bodies. It was a pocket for hands, a station for breath. The shelves held what you'd packed for flight: a tin of hard biscuits, a roll of linen, a small Bible with pages rippled by humidity, a sewing kit, a child's shoe with its lace tied into a sailor's knot, and at the very back, slid flat, under a board the width of a forearm, a ledger, thinner than the one in the well, its cover scuffed, its edges worn down to softness. When I opened it, the first page showed dates that skipped like stones. They began before the great battles and ended after the official peace. The station had been busy long before the cannons spoke, and long after the parades were finished. The entries weren't a list of soldiers. They were a roll call of travelers. Woman with boy, shoes ruined, left at moonrise. Man, wounded in hip, hummed the tune wrong until we helped him find it. 2 girls, hair braided tight, one with ribbon blue, sent apriva with M beside some entries. A simple note, paid with stories, and beside others, a mark like the outline of a leaf, pressed into ink as if the page had been kissed by a tree. The leaf mark reappeared every few pages. Its rhythm matched the 4 symbols on the river map: circle, triangle, heart, square. And I realized we were reading a route with rest stops that had nothing to do with flags and everything to do with neighbors brave enough to risk being called traitor by both sides. We were deep in the quiet of reading when the day threw down a sound that didn't belong to ink. The oak groaned, the throat sound of a tree that has held more weight than it should. A root had shifted in last night's rain. The earth a small cloud of dust spiraled, then settled back like it had only been practicing how to rise. I could feel the room measuring us. The field had allowed us to come this far, and now it tested our hands. We put the ledger away with the care of people who've just realized they are holding a bridge. There are moments when a puzzle that has been charming takes off its mask and shows you the face of its consequence. The map wasn't a riddle to solve. It was a responsibility. If we shouted its contents to the world, we might lift the names of the brave out of a century of anonymity. We might also draw scavengers. We might lead feet to doors that had been safe because they were forgotten. The past is dangerous not only because of what happened then, but because of what it can make people do now. We agreed no coordinates would be shared yet. We would bring the evidence to the people who protect the dead and the living both. We would make copies, lock originals, guard names. We would be as careful as those who built the station had been. And then the field decided our resolve needed a trial by fire. The first lightning bolt hit somewhere It didn't scream. It cracked, the way lead breaks. And with it came the quick, mean rain that jumps from dry to flood before anyone has time to say the word leave. We sealed the chamber with its lid and weighted it with stones. We ran to the well vault and put the ledger inside a waterproof case, cinched with straps, nested in foam, placed on an upper shelf. We braced the tunnel mouths with planks and tarps and the quick committee of hands that remember how to make a barn stand through a night. The landowner kept saying, "Steady," not calm, steady, as if the field could be convinced not to take back what it had just given. While we worked, the river rose with a speed that felt personal. Water clawed at roots, turned the bend into a muscle. The white stone darkened, then disappeared, then showed again like a shoulder. The door in the bank drank and held. The fault line seam under the oak stayed quiet, as if the old carpenters had made their hinges with the stubborn pride of people who expect to be judged by storms more than by men. We took shelter under the oak's arched arm and watched the field blur into a sheet of living glass. When the worst passed, the world had the breathed-out smell that follows a hard anger. The land had been washed clean and altered. The ravine wore a new edge. The trail had moved 3 steps to the left. The white stone kept its secret under a thin brown veil. We went from station to station, checking seals, whispering thanks to strangers we would never meet, 2 carpenters and neighbors, and the unrecorded hands of a network that had kept people alive by doing what needed doing without ever asking history's permission. Back at the oak, the small chamber held. The box still waited, but something had changed, not inside the earth, but above it. On the upturned lid, where mud should have dried and cracked, words had been traced with a finger in the wet, lines so fresh they bled when our shadows moved. 4 letters, Arian, and beneath them, a shape we almost missed at first because it was so simple, a heart, drawn quick and sure. We would have blamed a child if we had seen tracks. We would have blamed a prank if we'd heard a laugh. We found neither. The field had signed its name with the weather's hand, or so it felt. The rain had written what the men and women who built the door had been saying for years. Underneath everything else, rescuers love wearing boots and carrying a lantern.